Any Buffy the Vampire Slayer fans here? So if you happen to be close to my generation in age, you're aware of what a cultural phenomenon this was, at least for young people in the 90s. Um, it was pervasive. It was every time I went into a friend's house, I had 5 friends in particular who had Sarah Michelle Gellar posters up in their room or calendars. It was everywhere. And I didn't get to appreciate Buffy the Vampire Slayer when I was a kid because I was in a house where we did not allow such things. Vampires and women slaying them, can't have that. Witches, demons, you know, stuff that you would think it would be good to like drive a stake through the heart of. Not witches. Some of you are like witches or witch friendly, and I never. All right, but these are evil witches. All right, think we have to differentiate. One of the things that this show took off for was that it had this strong female protagonist. And not many programs did. You know, she was a high school age and then, you know, young adult, college age person in the show. And the show became, and Joss Whedon ended up becoming so influential that to this day we still talk about Whedonisms. You know, this pattern of like snappy dialogue between a couple of folks. It's the kind of thing that's kind of hard for me to explain up here, but if you watch The Avengers, you know what I'm talking about. You pick it up. Somebody says something, somebody else says something else, and then there's this snappy reply back. It's crisper than people actually talk, but it feels right. You know, it feels good. And this kind of put Whedon in the spotlight as a male feminist voice in the 90s. And he would go on to lead other projects with strong female leads. Firefly comes to mind. There was another one with clones. I can't remember. I don't know. The problem with espousing values and virtues is if other people know that you're full of it, you're leaving yourself open to be revealed later. And Kai Cole, in like 2017, after they had divorced, wrote this essay, which you heard part of. And she brought up that she believed in Whedon. She believed in what he said he was trying to do, that he was trying to empower women and give like a voice to help promote equality in a societal, perspective. That's why characters like Buffy mattered to him. But he also spent 15 years cheating on her. And often cheating on her with people that he had some level of power over, some people that he had as actresses or in some other level of the film industry. And for her, this was a fierce contradiction she couldn't totally put her mind around. And then she realized, like, well, he's telling me now that we're divorcing what's going on. He kind of found himself trapped in this lie, and it became coverage for, a type of shield for his actions. And then after she wrote this essay, other people from Whedon Productions started speaking up as well. Notably, Charisma Carpenter talked about how he regularly fat-shamed her and called her ugly on set. How Michelle Trachtenberg, who was a child when she was on the set, witnessed absolutely abhorrent and childish behavior by this guy, yelling and screaming and harassing people. Sometimes the values and virtues people claim come with selfish motives. Sometimes they provide cover for harmful actions. Now, in our story today, We are reaching the end of Jesus' life. We're in the book of John. Passover is coming, and now he's just a few miles away from Jerusalem for the last week of his life. He has just brought back to life his friend Lazarus, and him and the disciples, they're hanging out over at Lazarus' house, and Martha is preparing and serving the food, and all of the dudes are laying around the table. You know, this is back in a time period where you didn't really have chairs at the table. You lounged around on your side. And Lazarus is there. He's laying next to Jesus. The other folks are there. And Mary, Lazarus and Martha's sister, comes in with a pound of nard. You know, everybody knows nard is like precious stuff. You know, I know you all have jars and jars of nard at home. But we are told that this is like 300 denarii worth of nard, which is a perfume, a phlegmatic, oily substance. Denarii is like a day's wage. So this is like the better part of a year's worth of money. And she takes it. She grabs Jesus' stinky, gross, grimy, yuck feet and puts a pound of nard all over it and washes his feet with her hair. But this is a scene. This is a dramatic event. This is a very costly event. And because Jesus is in it, we want to kind of like drive out any kind of sensuality around it, but the text is demanding that we pay attention to like the body stuff that's happening in it. She's not just washing his hands, she's washing his feet. This is a welcomed act in the ancient world where you're walking through the yuck all the time and coming to somebody's house, the lowest level servant, if they happen to be a person of means, would often wash their feet. You know? This is a very kind act to have. Especially if you're going weeks between baths, right? Any of you ever wear sandals in the summer for like a day? You know how gross bare feet get out in the sun. Imagine it's days and days, and you're walking around in a place where animals are doing their business. You've got like marketplaces, you're going through produce and fields. It's a lot. And of course, Jesus walked miles and miles and miles and miles to even get to Lazarus' house in the first place. All of it, yeah. And then what does she do? She uses not just her hands. She doesn't get a rag. She uses her hair. Her hair. I can't imagine having enough hair to do that. And then choosing to do that. This is a tender scene, and it's supposed to be tender. This is an extravagant scene, and it's supposed to be extravagance. And Judas chimes in and just kind of bursts the bubble of what's happening here. He's like, I can't believe that she's using that on his feet. She's just wasting that. You know what we could have done with that? We could have sold it for 300 denarii. And we could have helped people. We could have taken care of folks who have very real needs. Which is true. This is very true. And we know this is a concern of Jesus and the disciples because all throughout this book, every time they encounter people with needs, they help the people with needs, right? But we're also told by our narrator, who can just see into the heart of Judas. Judas is doing a type of performative justice here. Yes, he's calling out the way this could have been used, but he is like the treasurer. He's holding the funds for Jesus and the rest of the disciples. You know, later on, during the supper scene, the disciples assume that when Judas leaves early, he's going to hand out some of the extra funds that they have to take care of people who are going hungry on Passover. He's not doing that, but that's what they just assume, because that's the kind of thing they would do. That's the kind of thing they trust Judas to do. But our narrator tells us Judas was wanting to steal some of that money. Sometimes the values we espouse are in service to us, not to the people we say we are speaking up for. Sometimes we talk about justice and equity, or we're tempted to talk about justice and equity and love and mercy and peace in a way that makes us look good at the cost of the people that we're saying that we could stand up for or stand with in advocacy. This is a thing I think we all have to watch out for. I think our text is here partially to warn of the dangers of hypocrisy. That's what it is. But also, Judas is in a leadership role as being one of the 12 disciples here. And people just assume his good intent. And we have people in our own lives, leaders that we've trusted over the years, right? Who perhaps we've felt a sense of betrayal by. They said one thing and they did another. I brought up diversity, equity, and inclusion a few weeks ago as one of these things I really mourn that are being gutted right now. And I want to bring up, like, somebody informs me that in their lived experience, that is something that they've seen used in a selfish way. And you know what? That's a true thing. That happens in their experience. And I don't doubt it. Because I've seen people who claim to care about diversity and equity and inclusion use those things for their own selfish gain. Just like I've seen people use love from the pulpit for their own selfish gain, right? Or who called out the need for peace and then pocketed proceeds for fundraisers, GoFundMes, and other things, right? These are things that happen. And these are things that we should criticize, just like we should criticize when Joss Whedon claims to care about women and then acts directly contrary to them. It is so easy for us to just buy in to what prominent leaders are saying because we agree with them, and then we choose not to see the wrongdoing they may be actively engaged in. I've done this too. You know, I got really hurt and disillusioned one time when I was working with a pastor who was on this side of deconstruction. And I was seeking that out. I was so earnestly pursuing like a different way, a healthier way of living out my faith. And he said all of the right things from the front. But behind the scenes was just frankly mean. It's kind of a turd, you know? I have a lot more empathy and sympathy for him this time, but I realized eventually I had to go. Like, he was hurting me. He was hurting other people. This wasn't okay. But for a while, I really wanted it to be true, that, like, he could show me a better way. And he showed me some things, but he also showed me some things to not do. And I think that's part of why we get texts like this text concerning Judas here. I also think we have to look at this as a type of mirror for ourselves. If we're criticizing Judas, as the text is doing, for voicing compassion and justice, but secretly hoping to profit from it, we also need to examine that. Like, am I doing that too? Do I care because I care? Do I care about people? Or do I care about how I look? Do I care about some sort of social reward I could be getting for this? Right? Jesus speaks up in the text, and he tells Judas to knock it off. Leave her alone. She's anointing me for the day of my burial. To Jesus, this is a profound and beautiful act of love. Yeah, it's extravagant. It's scandalous. It's uncomfortably sensual. And I don't mean that sexually. I mean like in the sense of you can feel it. You can smell this. You could picture it. And if you're, I don't know, maybe a hypersensitive person like me, you get, ugh, right? Some secondhand yuck. But it's disruptive. This is a disruptive display of love for Jesus. And it makes sense because Jesus just brought her brother back to life. He was already a friend. Now he's a friend who, like, brought her brother back from the dead. We're not told that because this is a Mary. This is Mary, sister of Lazarus. This is not Mary Magdalene. Yeah. So easy to do because we have other, like the Gospels have other texts. You know, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they have stories similar to this, but they're not exactly the story because John likes to take those stories and do his own thing with them. Yeah, he's got a purpose for it. Yeah. And one of the things I love about this, like Jesus is this picture of God amongst us. You know, he's carrying God out amongst the people. He says regularly, if you see me, you see God. And he's trying to show that, like, this is kind of like Avatar language. This is what God is like. He's trying to show us what God is like, show the people what God is like. And here, he accepts this gift of love, this display of love. He not only accepts it, I get the sense that it's precious to him. And when I think of God, I think of God as the God of love. I think of God as love itself. And devotionally speaking, it means a great deal to me that God not only desires to be loved, but like relishes it. Like that's motivational for me. If God receives our acts of devotion like this, I mean, that's beautiful. It's not just because it's the duty of humanity. It's tender. Now, the text goes on to say, you're always going to have the poor with you. You're not always going to have me. And I've seen that used and abused throughout the years, and I hate the way that gets twisted. I was at a church where I was a youth pastor, where our senior pastor brought this up as an example of like having spiritual priorities and not earthly priorities. And therefore, you know, the church down the street, they help with the food kitchen. We don't need to do that. We help with food for the soul. And it's such a way to just weasel out of communal concern, especially since the Jesus throughout the Gospel of Luke is helping people as he goes. This is actually a reference to a text in Deuteronomy where it says, yeah, you're always going to have the poor among you. You're always going to have people who have need among you. And therefore, the expectation is not to stop giving. It's to continue to give. Just plan on it. You're always going to need to keep giving because there's always going to be people who need help, you know? Just had to call that one out there. That's not in the notes. That's a freebie. I am struck by how Mary's extravagant gift of love is received, and I'm challenged by it. I'm also struck that in the next day, when the disciples gather around for, I guess it's actually the next week, it's like 6 days later, when they gather around to share in the Passover meal, Jesus gets down on his knees and washes all of their feet. We see a Jesus following this example, at least committing the same kind of act of love for his disciples. And when he does so, he says they ought to love each other like this as well. So I think this is a Mary that's not only showing this beautiful act of love, but a Mary who's teaching through her example. I think that's awesome. I'm also struck by the hypocrisy of Judas, who claims concern for the poor, but's really concerned for himself. He signals compassion and justice, but really wants money. And I hope we wrestle with that. I hope that we don't let ourselves off the hook because we're obviously not Judas. We'd never betrayed Jesus. But think about the ways we may be betraying the folks around us or even ourselves. I hope that we can get honest about our failings and not try to justify them. Because I think that is a huge temptation for each and every one of us who tries to do good in this world. To reach that point of, yeah, you know, I'm doing so much. I deserve this little bit off the top, right? I deserve this little indiscretion over here. I hope we can be people of integrity who try to be internally consistent. And I also hope that we could be people of wasteful, extravagance, perhaps even scandalous love for God by loving other people. I mean, that's how I'm trying to show up in the world, and I'll confess I have my good days and my bad days with it. When I see Jesus saying you're always going to have those in need amongst you, I see the greatest way that I can live into my love for the divine by trying to live into my love for the folks amongst us, with the folks amongst us, and also recognizing that I've been that person in need a time or two as well. I don't know what you'll do with all of this. Maybe you're Mary. Maybe you need to hear you've been doing some good stuff. The folks who criticize you, maybe they need to just leave you alone. You know? Maybe there's a part of you that's a bit like Judas. Maybe we all run the danger of being Judas and ought to reflect on this and check ourselves. Or maybe you're none of those. May we join in extravagant love together as a community with and for one another and our neighbors.